So today I will be here to give you, I guess, a session in problem solving 101. So just to confirm, you can all see my screen. Thumbs up. Yep, perfect. Cool. So today I'll be taking you through, I guess, 4 key things. One, we're going to think about how we might define a problem. Then we will think about how we develop an approach to start to solve for that problem. What kind of complementary analysis you might undertake to answer that. And then 4th, how you might pitch an idea. And these 4 things are really, really helpful to help you in the case competition that you are about to embark on. So the first one that I will go to is developing a problem. And today I've got, I guess, a neat little case study, which hopefully is much more relevant than what we usually would use, which is like a Big 4 banking example. So I think a cancer one is much more appropriate. So imagine you're a consultant and you've been hired by Cancer Council Victoria. So for those who aren't in Victoria or haven't heard of the Cancer Council, they are an independent, not-for-profit organisation who play a leading role in reducing the impact of all cancers on all people. And so they have 4 key goals and priorities that are to prevent, detect, care, and research. So you will be given some further information, usually in a case competition. So here I've got a bit more information for you. So in 2018, 3,097 Victorians were diagnosed with melanoma and 291 lost their lives to this type of skin cancer. The Cancer Council has released the free SunSmart app that lets people know when you do not need sun protection, making it easier than ever to be smart about your sun exposure all year. There are also a range of online learning modules offered by the Cancer Council on the prevention and early detection of skin cancer, diagnosis and treatment, and management of skin cancers. The Cancer Council Victoria have also done some initial research and are looking to roll out a new campaign to promote existing and new training and tools to Victorian health professionals. In the past, advertisement campaigns for training and new tools have been given limited resources. And what I guess the Cancer Council Victoria would like to do is to improve the knowledge of these tools as a first priority among health professionals in Victoria. So moving on to then what our task is and what we're trying to find out. And this is a similar problem statement which you may encounter in a case competition, or you may encounter something a bit broader than this. But for today, we'll focus on this particular project or subject example, and we'll work through it with the structure that I gave you earlier. So the Cancer Council have commissioned you to assist them with the following question that will help to guide them roll out a new campaign strategy. So what we want you to do is to synthesize Cancer Council Victoria's existing research on skin cancer training and technology solutions and provide advice on the key questions they need to answer before pursuing and implementing a new campaign strategy for health officials. And you might say to me, Paige, that seems like a really big challenge and I don't know where to start. Well, I am definitely here to help you. So we'll get on with how do we define the problem. So in consulting or whenever you're trying to solve, a big problem, we need to start with a clear statement of the problem that we want to be solved. And so we think about this as the situation, the complication, and the problem statement. So the situation being, what is the existing situation or context in which we're trying to solve in? The complication is, what's the trigger or what's the pain point that has led to this problem? And then the problem statement itself is, okay, well, what do we want to solve for? And in this section, what I'll cover with you is how to build a good problem statement, building in what we call a MECE logic tree from the problem statement, and what MECE even means, because that's an annoying term, and how different types of reasoning produce different issue trees, or problem trees, as we like to call them. So one way to understand the context and define the problem is to adopt what we call the SCP framework, which is that situation, complication, and problem. So we start with this problem statement because it establishes, establishes among all parties a common understanding of need. It also tells us what is of primary importance to answer and what is more so nice to have. So one way to understand the context and define the problem is to then adopt this framework. And this can be used both as a tool for communicating to a client or whoever you're presenting to, but also as a way to really understand deeply what the issue is. And as I touched on before, our situation is that frame for the problem within the context that you guys know about or your client knows about, and that is just accepted as fact. The complication is the change that has occurred and means that the situation unfortunately requires action, or sometimes quite positively requires action. And then we have the problem, or what we're trying to create, the resolution, which is the specific problem that is to be solved. So a good problem statement succinctly states the question the client wants you to answer. So sometimes the client is clear on what the problem is, other times they're not, and they think one thing is the problem and sometimes not. So confirming this up front is actually really important, so you have clarity going forward on what other key questions you might be diving into, but also then what is an appropriate type of analysis that you might need to do. So a good problem statement is really important because it brings everyone together around that common understanding of need. It tells us what is important, but also what is nice to have, and where you start impacts where you end up. So what I mean by that is, if you have something very specific, you can only go down that one path. But if we start a bit wider, then we can capture many different facets of a problem. And so having a structured problem statement is often what we refer to as the cornerstone of a structured thinking approach. And some good characteristics for a problem statement are either a leading question or a firm hypothesis, something that is specific and not general, something that is measurable. So measurable in terms of either can it be quantitative or qualitative, something that is actionable, something that is realistic and focuses on what the decision maker needs to help them move forward, and something that is time bound. So for example, within a year, the next 5 years, or I guess the end of a certain project date. And this all depends, of course, on the type of information that you are given in the interim. So the information that I gave you in the beginning would help you form up part of these goals. So just to give you some examples of how we might, I guess, use this type of framework. So this SMART framework, the specific, the measurable, the actionable, realistic, and time-bound. I've got some examples here on the slide which I can talk you through. And we can go through and see how we can make these better. So the first example here, number 1, is megastore.com is suffering from poor profitability despite a strong market niche position. And we say, cool, that's interesting, but there's nothing really else in here. It's not really a question. It's just a statement of fact. If we move on to number 2, where it says, should megastore.com improve its deteriorating position? It's, well, yes, but this probably isn't too helpful. So it's much more, I guess, non-disputable. Moving on to 3, can megastore.com be managed differently to increase profitability? This is not a bad question. However, it's probably still too general. So now if we move into how we might be able to make this more specific or actionable, hypothesis driven, if we speak about number 4, how can megastore.com improve its performance by 150 million per year, per annum, by reducing overheads, operational improvement or restructuring? We get some of those facets of that SMART framework coming out here. So we have something that is specific, we have something that is measurable, or we have that, I guess, qualitative amount in that $50 million per annum. We also have something that is actionable as well. But we can make this just that little bit better by incorporating that hypothesis part. We said right at the start of this framework, in that if we have a leading question or a firm hypothesis, this is a great place to start. So megastore.com should flatten and simplify its organizational structure, improve productivity, and tighten its hurdle requirements for new capital investment to deliver 50 million in savings per year over the next 2 years. So this meets, I guess, our hypothesis criteria as well. So number 4 or 5 are good examples of questions. And I should preface that no question is absolutely perfect, and there can be different variations of what's required. So I thought, let's have a go of how we might be able to do this for our particular question for this case study. So this is in relation to the Cancer Council has commissioned us to assist them to guide the rollout of their new campaign strategy. So what I'd like you to do is develop a potential problem statement for our scenario. And I want you to remember to think about something that is SMART, measurable, actionable. What have I've forgotten what R is? Isn't that great? Anyone in the chat want to put that in? Realistic, and then we've got time bound. Do we have everyone back, Jess?
Yep, should be all closed.
Great, perfect. So that might have been a bit trickier for some than others, and I can also understand. I think there was a want perhaps in some groups for wanting to think about, okay, let's quantify, what broad impact this has on preventing cancers in the long term, which is totally awesome because, as budding health people, that's what we're so keen to do. But we just need to take a bit more of a system-wide lens and think, right, so the overarching ultimate goal is how do we prevent detectable cancers, right? And these, I guess, apps or online training modules that we might be teaching GPs or, I don't know, ED clinicians, nurses, etc. How could that be contributing to that knowledge? And therefore, then going to that higher level of having that improved knowledge, so therefore you can identify more cancers and therefore prevent, I guess, cancers within the population. So as much as we want to solve that bigger challenge, the point of this exercise is to understand there's a lot more system-wide impacts that lower tier level, for example, a campaign strategy can achieve. So I'm interested then, before I reveal my answer, does anyone want to reveal in the chat what they spoke about in their group, what their question is, or put forward a hypothesis perhaps in relation to the case study that we discussed?
I think we were a bit confused on the STEM, but we brainstormed a couple things that might answer it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, go for it. Give it a go. This is an open, safe space.
Sorry, it's really long. I just sent it.
Yeah, okay, great. So what have we got in here? So hypothesis is Cancer Council should conduct a study in which a survey is sent to their app users to gather feedback in order to improve their app. Okay, so let's just, I'll take that first one, which is interesting. And this was a theme that came up in my group as well. And if anything, we're that next level of thinking down in terms of how are we going to solve this problem. And that's something that my head always races to is, okay, what data am I going to be able to get to validate this problem? And what this example shows is, yeah, okay, getting feedback from our app users is one way that we can do this, or one form of analysis we might be able to do. And that's awesome. And that's great, Chris. Thanks for sharing that example. What I would say though, is that we just need to be thinking just a higher level up so that we don't just get bogged down into one stream. And we'll get to this a little bit further along. Okay, Yanni. So the hypothesis from the group, integrating the use of media, including broadcasting and social media for 6 months, as well as putting pressure on Victorian policymakers to educate Victorian health professionals on melanoma in order to reduce mortality rates. Cool. I like the putting pressure on Victorian policymakers. You guys are such like positive undergrads, I think. Most of you, maybe so opportunistic and optimistic. I love it. I love the excitement. As much as I would like to say this happens, there's so much more to it, unfortunately. As a person who works on health program evaluations day in, day out with state and federal governments. But this is a good hypothesis. I like this. This is getting a bit more to that higher level of thinking. So we have something that is quite specific. So we're talking about the different types of media we might be looking into. We have that time bound in there, the 6 months, which is good. I think where perhaps we might just need to change this a little bit is that putting pressure on Victorian policymakers. I think we can generalize this a bit more to say, and it might sound a little bit wishy-washy, but it does help then when we get to a next level of thinking, is that it helps to inform future policy directions or just future decisions. And we keep it broad like that, more so for our own benefit in being able to explore then the different ways we could go, but also putting my client hat on. Clients get a bit scared when they hear that you're going to try and influence them and you don't do it as passively as what they would like you to do. Anyone else want to share an example that they spoke about in their group? We're doing that awkward Zoom waiting room thing. I feel like I need some music. Cool. Vincent, awesome. Can the Cancer Council's app data on users' exposure to UV be used to detect and notify at-risk individuals? Via the app to seek 10% less time in the sun in high UV situations and use 10% more sunscreen over the course of a year. Oh, cool. This is a very scientific question. I love it. So again, we've got something very specific. We've got something very measurable in that 10%. We've got something that is, I was going to say time bound, but maybe not time bound, but it does feel very realistic and quite actionable in terms of what we can look at. So this is not too bad. So not to say any of them are bad. That was not what I meant at all. More so that this is great in terms of specificity, but again, we may have just gone a little bit too specific. So thanks for everyone for sharing their examples. My feedback is entirely intended as to be developmental and to encourage you to keep thinking of that higher system level. And as I said, we're always passionate scientific health budding students wanting to solve the world and all of its health problems, which I absolutely love. But sometimes we just need to remember that there are broader system things at play, and we just need to acknowledge those in our questions. So here's one I prepared earlier. It helps if I don't show my inability to use online sharing platforms. Whew, okay, so what I came up with, and it might feel a bit generic to you now, but I will show you why shortly. So my statement was, how can Cancer Council Victoria feasibly implement a new campaign strategy to improve knowledge amongst Victorian health professionals? So you may remember that one of the priorities for Cancer Council was to improve knowledge in our information back a few slides ago. We wanted to target Victorian health professionals. And what did they want to do? They wanted to implement a campaign strategy. But we also knew within that situation or broader context that in the past, they'd tried advertisement campaigns, but they hadn't been successful, or they didn't have the appropriate resources to do that. And what sometimes that means is that they might not have the appropriate financial resources. They might not have enough people to support the development of the campaign and therefore the rollout of the campaign. There's a range of reasons for why this might be. So this is my problem statement. So what we'll get into now is developing an approach for how we might go about digging into this a bit deeper and pulling our problem apart. So so after we've defined the problem statement, logic trees are the crucial next step to outline how we will solve the problem. And logic trees serve three different purposes. One is to break a problem into parts. So problem solving work can be divided into intellectually manageable pieces. And this is perhaps goes back to when I said, that's great. You're already thinking about different hypotheses or drivers or little pieces of information that might be important, but we still needed to keep it that high level. This is one of those reasons. And so breaking down that problem into parts can also help us sort out the priorities between those different parts. It also helps us to think about where we might be able to allocate different responsibilities in a team. And specific to a case competition, this can be really important because if one person is just managing all of this information, that can be quite overwhelming. So it almost has a shared responsibility for who will research what and who will focus on what. And that means people bring new information together rather than the same information a lot of the time, which can actually be quite an efficient method of trying to, I guess, investigate a problem. The second reason why logic trees are quite important is they ensure integrity for problem solving. And that might sound strange, but solving the parts that will really solve the problem is actually what we're trying to achieve at the end of the day. And how we do this is all parts must be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Here is that term, MECE, and I'll get into it in a moment. And then thirdly, we have build a common understanding for both the team and the client. So our client at the moment in this scenario is the Cancer Council Victoria. So it gives us and them a bit of a problem solving framework. It helps us think about what are the core issues that we're really interested in, and then what are the different types of analysis that are needed to start addressing this. So in some of the examples that came through the chat was getting feedback on the app. So that could be one type of data required that then we can complete analysis on. So if I take you then into this term and wonderful consulting jargon term called MECE, you may or may not have come across it, but let's give it a go and see what you think. So MECE is a way of strengthening information into the sub-elements that are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So in other words, elements should exclude each other, i.e. they should be distinct and they should exhaust the relevant field, and that being contain everything that it belongs to. MECE is a method. MECE as a method should be used when you craft a problem tree or a logic tree for your case competition structure, and also in this example that we've been starting to develop. And in doing so, will help avoid dependencies between the different branches of the tree, and thus sub-problems can be properly isolated. So when we think about mutually exclusive, we're aiming to reduce complexity by avoiding overlaps. So as you can see on the slide, we have two separate groups or circles that don't overlap. So you need to make sure that the problem solutions or groups are not accidentally considered twice. And proving exclusiveness forces you to carefully look at each option, consequently leading you to a much deeper understanding of what an issue might be. On the other hand, we also have collectively exhaustive. So this aims to ensure a comprehensive collection of ideas without leaving alternatives. And exhaustive means that all possible options have been considered. The trick is to divide a problem into categories with a finite number of general groups. So for example, if you need to make means of transportation MECE, don't start by just collecting per foot, train, plane, bicycle, bike, etc. Try to find categories because this practice will more so prevent you from forgetting important options such as wheels versus no wheels, or you have air, water, land. So on the slide, I've got some examples of what MECE looks like. And so this might be in the form of making a meal. So you find a recipe, you gather ingredients, you make a meal, you serve, you eat, you clean up. Then we've got another option on there of different types of watches. So you have analog watches and you might have digital watches. And then you have subcategories within those, such as automatic or wind-up analog watches. And then under digital, you might have battery or solar. So I hope that's helpful in terms of providing a couple of examples as to what this framework looks like. And what we're going to do very shortly is to think about how we might apply this to our particular problem. A bit more on MECiness, because we just can't get enough MECiness, and we love that term so much, is that the more MECE sets and frameworks you have at your disposal, such as the ones you can see on the screen, the stronger your logic trees are. So this will be a slide that I'll post it in the chat so everybody can see it, because it will be useful in the next breakout group activity that we do. One other thing to just remember, and this is something I think I started getting into with my group for the problem tree, is trying to stick to what we call the 80-20 principle to avoid diminishing returns. So you can usually only get so far in your problem solving, thinking, and impact, and no logic tree will be perfectly complete. So it's all about having just that strong foundation and something that you can iterate and adapt as you go. So in your case competition, you might initially have a question or a hypothesis in your mind, but as you've done more research, you find, hey, we actually need to add more to this or make some changes to those sub-levels. And that's absolutely okay. And that is what I would expect to happen. But this is something that you shouldn't be spending hours on. It's more so something to get your initial thinking down, and is a 1 hour max kind of activity. So you might be thinking, Paige, what's next? So an example of how we might make this a bit more MECE, and this is a great example because it's an easy one, or I like to think it's easy. So we think about the broader question, how can I get to university at 8:30 a.m. instead of 9 a.m. every day? And if I was to break this down into those MECE categories, so the mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive categories, we might think about it a few different ways. So can I save time by preparing better the night before? I don't know, can you? Can I save time in the morning before leaving for work? Or can I shorten my travel time? So then we might think about, what are some sub-questions from this to help answer these sub-questions, if that makes sense? So we might have our question A, which is our top level question. Then we might have B, which is our 3 can questions. And then we might break it down into more questions. So what I might just term as C questions. So if we just were to think about, can I save time by preparing better the night before? There's a few questions you can ask there. Can I prepare clothes the night before? Can I prepare my lunch and leave it in the fridge the night before? And can I walk Max, the dog, the night before? And so then you will see, as I'm putting up on the screen, there are other, I guess, sub-questions that answer these level B questions. And I've just chunked down that problem just that little bit more to make it much more manageable and, I guess, answerable, rather than trying to answer that large overarching question. So what we're going to move into now is we're going to, well, we have a problem statement that we've been using, and you are all welcome to use the one that I have, or you can use one that your group may have come up with. And we're going to develop our own logic tree for the project. So we're going to start with the problem statement, start to develop our sub-questions, and then perhaps those sub-issues. You don't have to get all of these done, but I would say at least have a go getting through your problem statement and maybe 3 or 4 sub-questions. It doesn't have to be 3, but then at least have a go at trying to think through some of the sub-issues for a question that you do have. So what I think we might do now, Jess, is go to our breakout groups again. We're all back again. And you're probably saying, Paige, stop giving me the hard challenges for tonight. It's Monday night. We're here for a party. This is not cool. I want to log off. I need to watch Survivor. Like, it's just, look, problematic. But hey, thanks for staying with us and also enjoying my terrible humor. I'm great at it. And it's not a prerequisite for my job. It's just something that I've learned through the wonderful patient interactions I had in my clinical background. So maybe one day you'll all get to experience this as well. Okay, now to refocus and to have fun in a different way, because this is so interesting. And sorry, that's sarcasm and that's terrible. And I find it really hard on Zoom to get any kind of interaction. So I'm assuming by the 6 other people I can see on the cameras that I'm doing great. So where are we at? I would say from chatting with a few groups, this was challenging to do, and that's okay, because the first time I did a logic tree problem statement thing, I was like, what is this? This is not how I have been taught by my professors, by my physiology professor, by my, I don't know, by the doctor who taught me some kind of parasitology. You know, it just wasn't there in their repertoire. So this is a new way of thinking. I completely understand that. So we might do some breaking down together. And something that I just want to bring everybody back to, and hopefully this has landed in the chat. If not, I will share on my screen. Doesn't look like it's there. And it was something that I was talking to one of the groups about, was this screen here, which I may have jumped over a little bit, which was these different word sets, quantitative things to think about, but also conceptual frameworks of how we might think about a problem. So perhaps using one of these word sets or frameworks, does anyone want to chuck in the chat function what one sub question was that their group talked about or thought about? If anybody wants to have a go, and we can talk through it. You can also say, Paige, I got no idea, and that's okay too. Ah, cool, we've got a few in the chat.
So our group was talking about doing the online workshop. So we were thinking about how would we first promote the workshop itself? So how would they find out about it? and how long they would spend promoting the workshop before the workshop actually takes place.
Mhm.
That's one. And also who all can participate in it. So like, is it only healthcare professionals or can the general public also participate in something like this?
Mhm,
One of the questions as well we were just thinking about.
I think that's really good. Really good, Maria. I think a couple of things there is you've broken down the sub-question there into a few other bite-sized issues which you need to consider in answering that problem. So again, wanting to jump straight to the answer, which is, really great. I think we just need to bring it up to that higher level. And Vincent's dropped in the chat there, which I think complements then what you've said, Maria. A sub-question of how can Cancer Council Victoria best engage with health professionals? So that's a really great question, Vincent. Do you want to talk me through that a bit more?
Sure. I should give credit where credit's due. This is from one of my group mates. So we were trying to break up the question, and one of the issues was how to engage with health professionals.
Mm-hmm.
So when we brought that into sub-issues, we thought about methods of engagement. One of them was online. So we're thinking social media platforms or places where health professionals collaborate online, like LinkedIn, journals, or other online platform symposiums.
Mm-hmm.
And another sub-issue would be maybe have online learning modules. So thinking that's another way that we could engage with health professionals. They have like continuing professional development, I think it's called. So that could be possibly a way to engage and make it worth the health professionals' time.
Yep. And so then just taking it a step further then, and this is one area like a sub-issue we could potentially expand on under that, how can Cancer Council Victoria best engage with health professionals, is, I'm not sure if it was you, Vincent, or it was someone else in the chat to the previous question, was talking about getting feedback from, I guess, the app and finding out user preferences and that kind of thing. So that could also then be that would be a data source, but the question might be, what are people's preferences or health professionals' preferences to best engage or easily and in a timely way engage with this information. So that could be a sub area in which we break that problem down into further. Thanks for contributing, Vincent. Appreciate that. Let me see. Chris, you've put, can they increase outreach and collaboration with Victorian health professionals? I think that's good. I think that's another good question. Do you want to talk to that a bit more, Chris?
Kind of along the same lines of thought as like what Vincent and stuff have already mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, if the campaign is targeted to, hang on, let me just read the thingy again. If it was originally targeted to kind of just, they want to have a campaign where they can increase, I want to say notoriety with like Victorian health professionals. That way, if you actually engage with them and collaborate with them, they're on board with you. And because that way we can get like a similar understanding. So say, for example, if I'm Cancer Council Victoria and I want to include health professionals and also like get their knowledge, but also teach them at the same time or like learn from them, you can really only collaborate in order to get that right. And then you have to increase your outreach. And then through those professionals as well, like say your GP or like your dermatologist, they can also pass on like the apps, like the fact that the app exists and like the campaign exists to their patients and in their clinics, which then makes that out like a really wide outreach and then make the campaign successful, but also be able to actually, expand those resources and share that out with people. That way people then, like it then goes back to the solution of decreasing preventable, decreasing the rate of like preventable cancers within the public. So if you are collaborating with those core people, they can also bring that out towards the public, which in turn is what you're aiming for.
Yep. There's a lot of deep thinking there, Chris. Thanks for sharing, and already moving into solution mode, which I love to hear. I mean, that's bliss to consultants' ears in many ways, but sometimes clients just love getting caught up on the questions. What are we trying to solve? So I'll show you my prongs or my sub questions at least to this problem, and I'll talk you through what I thought. So our problem statement: how can Cancer Council Victoria feasibly implement a new campaign strategy to improve knowledge amongst Victorian health professionals? So we kind of need to understand what is current state. So back to that slide I had before, sometimes we might have, let me just find my slide. We might have current, future, and gap analysis, but it's really important for us to understand, what is currently delivered in the landscape. So I gave you some information initially, but there's probably still a bit more to do, or there's things that might already be rolled out by other organizations, and it's still important to be aware of that in that landscape and understanding then how are outcomes measured through what's already available. And if you also discover there's no outcomes measured, then that might actually mean that there's a bit of an adjustment to the question or the scope of what you need to do. Another question that I thought of is, what are, I guess, new enablers required to deliver a campaign strategy? So I guess this does feed into what we were talking about with Vincent and Chris in terms of outreach or methods of engagement. And this is, at least for me, where I think that getting feedback on what types of methods might be suitable for this particular cohort would be useful, because there's no point in rolling out something that people just aren't going to look at, have the time to look at, or is just too much information and therefore it's not easily processed. And that will then lend itself to poorer outcomes, and the outcome being that we want to improve knowledge. The third part to this question that I've thought about is, what campaign strategy provides the optimal solution for Cancer Council Victoria, and how does it align with its strategic goals? So you would have noticed that earlier I spoke to you about, I guess there's 4 key goals that the Cancer Council is setting out to achieve, or are at least its priorities, and that was to prevent. What else did we have in there? We had detect, care, and research. And so it's just thinking about more broadly how whatever campaign strategy that is rolled out, is that going to align with those 4 pillars as well? So that's, I guess, a brief overview of how we might go about starting our problem-solving approach. Thirdly, we have our research methods, and there are a range of methods we can use to gather data. And from what you can see on the screen, the increasing level of specific detail goes from left to right. So our data sets can have quite a lot of intricate detail, whereas our interviews, whilst still can hold a lot of information, if we're kind of following what we might think of in science as reliable versus less reliable studies, we think of our random controlled trials as that be-all, end-all premium standard. And we can relate that here to the desktop research and analytics area. Whereas if we might think of something more as maybe quasi-experimental, we might go more towards that interview or focus groups. So there are different ways to measure different things, essentially. And what you can see on the screen, so the desktop research and analytics, the survey, workshops, interviews, or focus groups, these are all things that have actually come up in this discussions we've already been having tonight. But it's just recognition that depending on what our question is, we might not be able to learn everything through a survey or through desktop research. And we may have to investigate other options, such as workshopping ideas or interviewing particular groups, so we can get understanding of different areas. But there are other methods we can also use as well. So not as common, but also important to be aware of. We have things like data visualization, ethnography, immersive prototypes. So that could be developing, I guess, different personas. So people using a system, you could have a system design through developing a prototype. We have financial modeling. There's also a thing called business origami. Don't ask me what that is. I've only used it once, and it's a real life demonstration and doesn't really work for virtual workshops, unfortunately. So then, when coupled with your stakeholder engagement plan, each key line of inquiry or question that we've identified here, you need to use at least one data source. And we use the analysis plan to help us organize the work to understand where we should focus during each data collection period. So an example on the screen here is how we might perhaps think about how we're going to address our problem. So what we had on the screen before was, what we talked about before was getting feedback from people, and I like using that example. So we might decide that that's one of our data collection methods here. So say through a survey, and that aligns closely with a question that I had about understanding what perhaps are new enablers are required to deliver an effective campaign strategy. So that brings us to our very last part of this session, which is thinking about, so in the case competition, I'm going to have to give all of this information back. And it's important that you can deliver your presentation succinctly in a structured way, but then also so you're leaving people with a lasting message and they will remember you. So in consulting, we use what's called the pyramid principle. And if you want to look up a bit more information, the company that I work for now uses what's called the Barbara Minto pyramid principle. There's a few journals on that if you are interested. So what that means is you start with the answer first. So as you can see on the slide, we start with what is our recommendation? And because the reason we do this is because often our executives or whoever we might be presenting to are often short on time and they just want to hear the answer first. And this greatly differs to how we usually write a research report or a journal article. You usually go through the background, then the method, then the data analysis, then the discussion and conclusion. So it's a complete flip of what we're taught in university. Then we might group and summarize our supporting arguments. So as I said, the top of the pyramid is the statement, with the base of the pyramid as the key supporting ideas. And often we limit these ideas to 3. And 3 is a general consulting principle because often people can't remember more than 3 things, sometimes 5, but usually 3. And then there will be a logical order for your supporting findings. So every piece of information on the pyramid base should reinforce the point above it and should be arranged logically. You can group this information in a time order. So if there's a sequence of events that form a cause and effect relationship, you can present them in the time order. There's a structural order, so break a singular thought into its parts and make sure you have covered all of your parts. Or there's a degree order, so present ideas in rank of importance. So say you might say there are 4 key things that are really important here. However, number 1, we do X, number 2, we do Y, and then you may not need to go into 3 and 4, but you've just presented the 2 most important pieces of information. So then if we're just moving into some quick tips for presenting in case competitions, one tip that was given to me was to be low and slow. So what that means is presentation is actually more important than the substance itself, which is interesting, and the reverse of what we're taught in science. But I think we have to remember is that sometimes people have short memories and they just want to hear I guess, what is the answer and why does that matter? And this goes to then thinking about the storyline. It's important to be convincing and think of who your target audience is at the end of the day. There might be a lot of information that you personally care about, but you still need to keep in mind who your target audience is. And then often in case competitions, there's always a length on the slide pack or also the presentation time. So often it's just about managing this challenge. So I guess that's me in hopefully shortish, concise time on how to solve all the problems of the world with a very structured method. And I hope you've been able to take away today the 4 key things, which are how to define a problem, developing an approach, how you might conduct analysis, and how you might tackle a case, or at least present it back to people who you are trying to sell your case competition to. So without further ado, I might just pass back to Jess.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Paige, for that very comprehensive and very informative presentation. I'm just wondering, does anyone have any questions they would like to address to Paige? Feel free to either unmute or pop them into the chat.
Ashley, I can see you have a hand up.
Oh no, that wasn't a hand up. Sorry.
Oh, I muted Zoom. Oh dear. Sorry to put you on the spot.
So I think someone has asked in the chat, is this essentially like making a policy?
Good question. Making a policy. Maria, can you delve into that a bit more, please?
No, I was just saying that the way that the problem is approached in, at least in this, in the example that you're giving, it felt like a little bit like how a policy would also approach a problem as well. So I just thought that maybe with those parallels, it'd be easier to address the problem, like easier to form the logic tree and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely one way of looking at it. And I think in many ways is often how I think policy can be informed. I think something that I learned in my public health masters actually is we have ways of prioritizing and planning different public health solutions. So that might be through needs assessment or just understanding what the broader state or federal government policy intentions are. So that's where I guess that policy landscape comes from. But then we need to develop some kind of response or intervention or project that is in response to that. And so this is, yeah, I guess in many ways policy, but then in other facets of work, you can still apply the same method to developing a strategy, to perhaps co-designing some kind of initiative, thinking about how we even conduct evaluations of programs as well. So it's quite multifaceted in how this framework can be used.
Okay. And I also want to ask, like, if we suppose like we don't have many sub questions for our problem statement, is it okay to just focus on one sub question and just go with that, or is it better to just have many in general?
Yeah, good question. I mean, if your sub question is just one question which you want to branch out from, then wouldn't that just be your problem statement to start off with? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, awesome. And someone has also just asked, will we get access to the recording and the slides? So we are recording this event and we will upload it to our Facebook page as soon as possible. And Paige, if it's okay with you, maybe we'll also pop up like a PDF version of your slides.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fine.
Okay, awesome. Cool. If no one else has any other questions, I might just handball it over to Aisha to wrap things up now.
Yep, perfect. Thanks again, Paige. I really enjoyed the presentation. And thank you to everyone who's still here and came along today. It's been a really fantastic workshop and I hope you've all gotten a lot out of it. Just a quick reminder, the information night is this Thursday, so it's a little bit of a different format. We'll have 4 guest speakers speaking about our case topic this year, the HPV vaccine up course completion in First Nations adolescents. So if you'd like to come to that, remember to click going on the Facebook event and grab your free ticket via try booking before they run out. Perfect. Well, thanks everyone, and we'll see you Thursday, hopefully.